Hi, my name is Ellen Carucci, and I'm with Orchard House Medical Adult Day Center, and this is
Joe Petretto from New Haven, Connecticut. Now I live in Bella Vista.
So I'm here to talk to Joe about some of his memories from childhood and service and the rest of his life. So Joe, tell me about your childhood.
Well, when I was born, my mother thought she was going to have twins, and I weighed 12 and a half pounds.
And tell us exactly where you were born.
I was on Rosette Street in New Haven, on a kitchen table. Not in a hospital.
Okay.
And it was 24 Rosette Street.
And that was July 26, 1925. What do you remember about your childhood?
Well, as I grew up, I got involved with several people, and I had a few experiences that are a little unusual.
Well, tell us, before we get to that, tell us about your family. What were your parents like? And were your grandparents still alive when you were born?
My parents came from Perenje Forge in Italy, and my father came from Naples in Italy.
Okay.
And they met and they were married, and we had 6 children, 3 boys and 3 girls.
And you were one of the boys?
I was one of the boys.
Okay.
And when I was growing up, we moved from the house where I was born, and we moved to Washington Avenue.
Okay.
And when we moved to Washington Avenue, down the end, it's called 709 Washington Avenue. We stayed there till about, I'd say it was about 4 years. Then we moved again. And we moved to Westport C Street in New Haven. And this was all in the hill section.
Okay.
Okay. Then we moved again to Button Street. And from Button Street, we moved again to where I finally settled down on 534 Washington Avenue.
Okay. So where did you go to school? Did you like school?
I went to school, Harris State School.
Okay.
And I graduated from Harris State School, and I went to Truman Street School. From Truman Street School, I graduated from Truman Street School, and I went to college, but I only went, high school. I only went to 2 years because my father and mother need money. So I went to work on the railroad.
Was that your first job?
With my father.
Your father worked in the railroad?
16 years old.
All right, so tell us about that. Your dad worked for the railroad too?
Yeah, he was in the storehouse.
Okay. So this was in New Haven?
Yeah.
So tell us about your first job.
Well, I stayed there, and I worked myself up to a machinist helper and in 2 years. But then I got drafted from the job, and they told us that they would give us our job back again when we were discharged. And so what happened was when I was drafted, it was kind of unusual because they gave us a choice as to what to do, where you want to go in the Navy, the Army, or the Marines.
Okay.
So I chose the Navy because my brother was on the USS Washington.
Is he an older brother? I forgot to ask you. Was your brother, obviously he was an older brother.
Alan.
Alan, okay.
Mm-hmm.
So were you the middle child?
He was first.
He was first. And where did you fall out of the
Next.
six? You were the second oldest. Okay.
And then my sister, and then another sister, and then another brother came later, whose name was Carmen, and then another sister, and another sister.
Okay.
So that makes 6.
So your older brother was already on a ship.
Yes.
So that's why you chose the Navy?
And that's why I chose the Navy, because he told me that you get 3 squares a day, you sleep in a bunk, and you don't eat anywhere but in the chow hall.
All right, so when you got drafted, where did they send you? Where was the first place you went?
The first place I went was to Hawaii
Was that for training?
on the ship.
Okay.
The ship was called the USS Canberra. It's the only ship in the United States fleet named after a foreign country, Australia, because the HMS Canberra was sunk in the Coral Sea. So to pay tribute to Australia, they named the ship Canberra. And I went on board the Canberra. I went to boot camp first in New York.
Where in New York do you?
In Ellis Island.
Oh, that's a very significant place.
And
to
I was up there for about 4 months, and it was cold. And what happened was when I came out of boot camp, they said, went on board the ship in South Boston, you're only going to stay here for overnight, then you go someplace else. We never got off the ship.
Wow. So was that a different ship that took you to all the way, you went from Boston to Hawaii by ship?
It was South Boston Navy Yard.
Okay.
And the ship was docked there. And then what happened was that they told us to be here overnight, but we never got off the ship. We went for a shakedown cruise to Trinidad, and we went through a terrible tornado because I was in what is called Division C on the ship because I was a cook.
Oh, you were?
Yeah. And
had you cooked before, or was this your first?
Oh no, I'm a very good cook.
Okay.
If I say so myself. And when I came out of the shakedown cruise on Trinidad, we came back to the South Boston Navy Yard, and from there we went to Hawaii in the South Pacific through the Panama Canal.
Oh, okay.
I was the only one that went through the Panama Canal 3 times.
Okay, so that's the first time. So
The second time we came back after we were torpedoed because the Navy didn't want us to go to Seattle where we were going to get permanent repairs, because the Navy said, no, you can't go, you got to go back to Boston. And because we had on board ship something that was a top secret, it's called radar director control, where all the guns are controlled by computer. And they turn back and forth. It was very exciting. And we had target practice with the planes up in the air, and we knocked down every single one of those shoots, every single one of those targets.
wow, was this exercise in Hawaii?
When I was in Hawaii, I made Liberty, and then we left Hawaii, and we went to an island in the South Pacific called the Seymour, and we made Liberty on the island, And from there, we went to mostly all the islands in the South Pacific and made liberty on them on the LLC. When the ship does not go, stays out, and you get on the LLC and go to liberty.
Okay.
When the front door drops down, that kind of thing. So it was quite a bit of experience. In fact, we went to an island called Saipan, and Tinian. So on Tinian, the Japs were already there. We were on Saipan, and so the Marines wiped out the people, the Japs on Saipan, and we made liberty there. And so it was like a movie show, watching the kamikaze planes diving into the aircraft carriers.
How close were you?
And we were out in the South Pacific, where, between the islands, and we sat topside and watched them dive into the aircraft carrier, and one of them was the Hornet. And so what happened was the Hornet was so badly destroyed that they made another ship called the Hornet. And when we were out in the South Pacific, we were heading for Australia, for our mother country. And all of a sudden we got orders to chase the Jap fleet up the Jap Bay. And so that's when we were 60 miles off Okinawa, where we were torpedoed.
Oh my goodness, how frightening that must have been. Were you?
Well, I was 3 decks below, what they call Radio 3,
Okay.
when the torpedo hit. It knocked me off the chair, knocked the headphones off my phone, off my head, and I didn't know what happened. So I got back on the phone. I said, "What happened?" They said, "We were torpedoed." And so we're sitting there, and we didn't know what was going to happen. But afterwards, we found out that the torpedo hit better than 300 yards away from us.
Okay.
So the ship was 704 feet long.
Okay.
That was the heavy cruiser. And when that happened, the ship stopped dead in the water, no energy, nothing. But the
Were there
gunner,
any casualties? Were there any casualties?
yeah, the men in the bulkhead and in the engine room, 22 of them were killed
Oh gosh.
instantly. But my brother, who was in the same task force as I was, seen my ship get hit. And he said it was nothing but a ball of fire when they got hit.
And he knew you were on it.
And so what they did was they broke radio silence to let my brother know I was all right, because I was 3 decks below.
Right.
And we were 3 of us down there. It was Kippenberger, Robinson, and myself. And there were 2 life jackets that were sitting on the floor. And there were 3 of us. And Kippenberger was my size, and Robinson was a little guy. So you can imagine who was going to get the best. And I stopped. And I said, "What did you stop for?" He says, "We sleep on the life preservers all the time in back of the oscillator." And so they were put on the new ones, and we waited. And, it was kind of a touch and go kind of thing. So all of a sudden, the Lieutenant J.G. came down through the escape hatch, and it might have been Jesus, probably, and it went down, and he let us back up. So when I went topside, bullets were flying all over the place, and I didn't get hit.
Wow.
And that was God, because he knew me before I knew him. And so what happened was that I went to my general quarters station, opened up the hatchway to get into the third gun, and he fell out, burned to death. So that was my
Is the ship taking on water
general
at
quarters
this point?
station. Pardon me?
Is the ship taking on water?
Well, let me say this. There are two commands in the Navy. One is general quarters, and the other one is condition 1 easy. When the torpedo hit, it was in condition 1 easy. That means all hatchways are closed,
Okay.
every bit of them. Down below, like where I was, everything was closed, okay? So that's why the ship didn't sink.
Okay.
It had a big hole in it. When we got on dry dock, we were able to see that. But what happened was, for 2 months, I wasn't able to take a bath or any kind of hygiene, and topside was open, so we could go to the mess hall and get a sandwich, but that's it. And water we could not make water because it's reverse osmosis. So they couldn't make water because the ship had no energy, dead. So the ships came alongside and gave us water. But we could only take 3 gulps from the water fountain, because there were Marines sitting there with a .45. If you took more than 3, he was ordered to shoot you.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and so water was a very, very important thing when we were still out there in the Pacific.
So you were basically stranded there.
Huh?
You were basically stranded.
Well, when a torpedo hit, the ships that stopped dead, the fleets were going away. And what happened was the USS Boston took us in tow,
Okay.
and we went to join the fleet. Now what happened was there was a ship called the Houston that was camouflaged exactly like us, only it was a light cruiser, not a heavy cruiser. And the Japs didn't know that. So the following night, they went after that ship tooth and nail and lambasted that thing, torpedoed it. And the history of that ship was told to me by one of the sailors that I met in the mess hall. And he said that it was a terrible thing. One person just hollered, "Overboard!" So they all jumped overboard. And at that time, the destroyers and destroyer escorts were coming to rescue them. And they were crushed between the hulls and propellers. Terrible. And that was a terrible sight. But that's one of the things. So she was taking what we were on most of the time was on a salvage tug.
Okay.
That the Navy had to tow us. And it was quite an experience, but...
Because you're in enemy waters there, right?
I still was in the South Pacific,
boy.
right in the Japs down in all the places. Anyway, to make the long story short, we were being towed through the water at 3 knots an hour, otherwise the bulkheads would bust open.
And so who's towing you? Which ship is towing you? Another destroyer?
The Houston and I were towed together.
Got it, okay.
And the Admiral Nimitz got a brainstorm, and he decided to use us decoys. You know what that is? Sitting ducks.
Oh boy.
And they took out 75 aerial torpedo planes to come after us. Combat Air Patrol, which are the planes on the ships, aircraft carriers, knocked down, believe it or not, 65 of them in 4 hours. That was a miracle.
Wow.
10 of them got through. The ships knocked down 8, and 2 got through to us. And then the one plane let a torpedo go into the Houston, and you could see the dead bodies flying up in the air. And they came right at me, and if he had kamikazed into the ship, that would have been the end of me. That would have been dead.
So what happened to that
But he
plane?
banked right over.
Oh.
He banked over and went between the 2 ships. And when one ship was firing on this side, the other ship firing on the other side, bullets were going all over the place. So finally, the people that were on top side, which were gunners mates, knocked down the plane that got us, and we were very happy about that. Now there were 3 survivors, and the 3 survivors came alongside the ship. And then Captain Early said, if you want those 3 people alive, don't put them on this ship. Because he knew that
So this was from the Japanese plane?
we would have did a number on them.
Wow.
And so what happened was that they didn't come aboard. So we were 2 months being towed, and we finally got to Ulithi, which is an island north of Australia. And in Ulithi was the biggest dry dock in the world, in Ulithi. So they were like a submarine. They go down, and then the ship the tows onto the floating dry dock.
Okay.
And when they got on there, then it comes right back up. And then we were able to see the damage that the torpedo did. You could drive a freight train through it. And the propeller that drove the propeller was bent in half. And the people down in the engine room were dead, and they told us to go down and get their dog tags. And we had to go down there because it was an order. So I went down there and got a few dog tags from a few people when they wore them. And all kinds of insulation were all over, floating all over the place. Because of the bulkheads being damaged. So what happened was we came topside, and that was around Christmas time.
And what year, do you remember?
Yeah, 44.
44, okay.
1944. And Christmas in 1944, we celebrated Christmas on the floating dry dock. They made all the candles out of the shells of the different ones that were used to shoot against the Japs, and they made crowns of them. And there was a service on the ship, and we joined the service, and at that time the chaplain was Protestant and was a Catholic, and so he was kind of in limbo, you know. But he did a nice job in servicing that day, and we went out. We went down below, and we got a beautiful meal that was on the ship, on the floating dry dock. And so we were on the floating dry dock until I'd say they did temporary repairs on the ship. And
Did you at least get a shower on the floating dry dock? No, still no water.
No, yeah, yes, I'm sorry. Yeah, there was a room, a bathroom where we could take a shower and shave, which is the first time. And the experience was quite awesome. What we did was we used to spread out the canvas to catch the rain, and that's how we washed ourselves. That's it.
That was
For
your
2
water
months.
supply. Wow.
It was 2 months. So after that was done, and then we got off the floating dry dock, we headed for Seattle, and that's where they get the orders to go back to the Boston Navy Yard because of the radar director control program that was on our ship,
Right.
and they didn't want the Japs to know about it. So we went right through the Panama Canal again, and we went to South Boston, and we stayed in South Boston for about 6 months, and then the Japanese, the Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the A-bomb was dropped on them,
Right.
and that was the end of the war.
So you were still in
And
Boston
so
when that happened.
What happened was we were getting discharged, so we went right back to Thousand Island in California.
You had to go from
Right through the
Boston even though
Panama
you were coming.
Canal
Oh my
again.
goodness.
And that's the third time. And so when we came back on a train which had booths and so forth to sleep on, and they fed us when we were coming across. It took us 9 days to come from California to Boston Navy Yard.
Wow.
9 days, because we were sidetracked from any train that came along. And there's a few stories that I don't want to divulge them, but there were a few stories that some of the mates got involved in, and they had some sicknesses, and we had to stop and buy the medicine for them and so forth. But they survived because we were able to, you know. But it took us 9 days to come. We were being fed. Everything was okay. And when we got back to the South Boston Navy Yard, that's when I had the experience with my cousin in Waterbury.
What happened?
Well, those days the trolley cars were running,
Okay.
and this trolley car, my cousin said, "Let's go where I know a couple of girls that are there, and we can meet them." So I said, "Okay." So we went out to what they call Oakley Street, and that's where I met the girl that I married.
And that's Laura?
She was a very beautiful,
What was her
beautiful
name?
girl at the time, but something happened. Anyway, to make a long story short, I would like to say that when I was growing up, I had 7 experiences to be dead. One of them was we were taking apples off the tree and a person came
And
out with a shotgun.
You were young. This was when you were 5?
I was 5 years old. And the fence were put together with an iron. And the iron was about 1/4 of an inch thick. If it was thinner, it would have decapitated me.
Wow.
Okay? So I went at over tea kettle, and then we jumped the fence. And that was the first experience when God knew me before I knew him. And the next experience was when we had sleds, and we patted this was on Moore Street, the end of Moore Street in New Haven, and we patted them so we'd go over the railroad track.
This is Johnny Purcell's flexible flyer?
Huh?
Is this Johnny Purcell's flexible flyer that you told me about once?
Yeah, well, that was was different.
Okay.
Here it was at the end of Moore Street, and we patted so we go over the railroad tracks, and so the train would come at 5 o'clock to the lumber yard, and as I was going down the hill, and it was collision course. So I dug my foot into the ground, and the sled just enough so that the connecting rod went by my shoulder. That was
Oh my goodness. How old were you there?
I was 7 years old then.
Oh, goodness.
Then what happened after that, God helped me then, and he helped me when I didn't know him. And then what happened, we were on a place called the Plymouth Hill in Plymouth Street, and it goes straight down. And so we had sleds that we made from the junkyard, and they were kind of high. And so Johnny Purcell, whose father was captain of the fire department in New Haven, got him a present of a flexible flyer. So I said, John, do you mind if I use your sled to go down the hill? He said, no, go ahead, take it. Well, make a long story short, I was really, my mind was really excited about the sled, that they were hollering, and they were saying, a car is coming.
But you just thought they were excited. Oh, goodness.
And the car
Oh, my goodness.
went over me like this. And
So you had 2 sledding accidents.
that's the third time.
Oh, my goodness. And 2 on sleds.
Yes, and then what happened was after that, I was in Junior Klein's backyard. He's a young man I knew, and his staircase blinded you on the left side. So my father opened up the window and said, come on home to supper. So I got on a makeshift wagon, which had wheels on and everything, and I went down the hill. And just as I got on down the hill, I could see what was on my left side, and it was a big car, Buick, coming after me. It was a collision course. So I jumped. All I did was jump up in the air, landed on the running board of the car. And that's when God knew me before I knew him. I didn't get killed, but the wheels went right over the box that the apparatus that I had going down the hill, because the wheels were spinning very fast and all that stuff. But anyway, that was the fourth experience of being where God knew me before I knew Him. So the next time it was when I was in the Navy, and we got on top side, bullets were flying all over the place. Not one of them hit me. That's another time. Then another time was later on when we were again on Liberty, because I was a ship's cook at the time, and I went to this restaurant, and this sailor friend who knew me, and he knew that I wasn't supposed to be off the ship, because what happened was that the ship, being a second class cook, I went off with a pass. So when I was turned in, the master of arms grabbed me and said, "Well, why are you off the ship?" and so on. So they said, "Who gave you that pass? Like a second pass?" I wouldn't say nothing. This fellow Red, was a redheaded young man, made the pass. And it was great. You could look just like the real thing. And they caught me. And I was in the brig, and at VJ Day, I was in the brig. And so what happened was that there was so many things happening at that time that God knew me before I knew Him, because He saved me from that experience. And so soon as VJ Day was on, I was went again to Dawson Island, and I got a dishonorable discharge because of the make-believe pass. And so when I got back in Boston, when we were, by the way, I meant to say, when we were in Boston Navy Yard, I worked for the railroad, and the railroad gave us passes to go on the train and go to New Haven. And many of the people said, "Well, are you still in the Navy, or what are you doing?" You know, because I was there quite a bit. And of course, at the time I met my wife to be. She came on board the ship, and all the people recognized her and said, "Oh, that's the one that you got the picture of." I said, "Yeah."
So did you meet her when the trolleys were running? Go back to how you met your wife.
Well, I met my wife when I was in the annex in New Haven,
Okay.
called Oakley Street. And we went in there, and they were very nice. They gave us food to eat and so forth. My cousin from Waterbury was the one that was responsible for taking me there. And so I recognized, her name is Laura. I recognized her, but she was a good cook. And her mother, Mina was her name, wonderful woman. And her father, wonderful man.
So you said you recognized her. You had known her, seen her around the neighborhood before, or?
No, because she was far away.
Okay.
So when you take the trolley car and you go to the annex was not part of New Haven at that time.
Okay.
It was separate. And so that was, the trolley car took us all the way up there. And there were a couple of times when we were going, 2 trucks were coming down the road right at us. And, you know, the conductor put the brake on and went to the back of the truck. Meanwhile, the trucks went around us. They didn't hit us. So it was quite an experience. So she came aboard ship after that, and then we had a double wedding. Not
So
a single wedding, a double wedding.
who was the double wedding with? Who else got married that
with
day?
her aunt,
Okay.
who was 1 year older than she was. And she married this young man called Johnny O'Brien. And their father did not like the Irish at all, so he didn't attend the wedding.
Where did you get married, Joe? Where was your wedding?
It was in the church on Main Street in the Annex.
Okay.
Yeah, St. Peter's was the name of the church. So the other thing was when I went through that situation and we got married. Anyway, it was 4 years before I got my first child. I was sitting on the table in this room with this woman named Josephine Payne, who sang at the Worcester Street Carnival all the time. And we sat and we talked. And we talked about her not having a child. So I said, why don't you go see my doctor and see if you can do anything for you. His name was Dr. Fischio. And he examined my wife and he found a birth on her womb and he cauterized it. And after that, MJ was born, my first daughter. Her name was Maria Joanne, after my mother. And that's what she shortened her name to MJ. And, MJ like MJ in daycare,
Yeah, our MJ Stevenson, who does recreation.
Yeah. So you talked to her.
I did. I talked to her on the phone. I haven't met her in person.
Yeah. Anyway, the situation after I got married, my wife could drink anybody under the table because she had her appendix was leaking poison into her body all the time, but a very small hole. And then finally it came to a head, and her legs were all bumps. And I said, what's going on? And she says, I don't know. I said, well, okay, I'll take you to the hospital. Well, she went to the hospital, she went into a coma, and they took out the appendix. And when she came out of the hospital, after she came out of the coma, she says, he didn't want me. I said, who? He says, God did not want me. I says, what? What are you talking about? And she went into a doldrum where everyone was taking advantage of her. So I had 3 daughters, and one was MJ, one was Connie, and the other one was Laura. And 3 daughters, when they again were in the house and so forth, you know, they knew that she was out of it, you know. They took advantage of it. They said, okay, I'm going to send you to a place where you're going to get disciplined. And all 3 of them went to a place called East Haven Drum and Bugle Corps. And they learned to become really disciplined because they had to be. And so that was okay. And after they did that, there was an incident where this house had what they call the slumlords at the time, and they were bothering my daughter as they were walking down the street. And so I told her, I said, the next time you bother my daughter, I says, I'll hit you, I'll shoot you right between the eyes. I said, I'm a sharpshooter. I became a sharpshooter because when I was young, next to the Poli Theater was a restaurant, and only for dinner and no supper, closed. But in the back of it was a shooting gallery, and they raised up 5 matches, and you had to knock all the matches down, and you make $1, you know. Well, as time went on, I kept going because it, cost me money because I was a shoe shine boy at the time, and I got so that I could light the matches.
Wow.
Very sharp. When I was out hunting in Maine, and I shot at a deer, boom, right down.
Wow.
So I told them, I says, if you bother my daughters again, I'm a sharpshooter. I said, I hit you right between the eyes. So this motorcycle person came after me, and I had what they call a pinch bar in my hand. It was a heavy bar. And I took it and I threw it right into his spokes. He went flying. And I went down and I said, the next time any of you people bother my daughter, you're gonna be dead. They said, what do you mean? Because I'm a sharpshooter, and I can shoot you and just like that, no problem. And they said, oh, really? Then the rumor got around that I was a sharpshooter, so they didn't bother my daughter anymore. That was good. So anyway, that was on Highland Avenue in East Haven. I lived first on State Street, right where Rossler was making the hot dogs.
Okay.
And I, at that time, I was just out of the Navy, and I went there, and I was an air conditioner, more or less let's say not too much experience. And I met this fellow who was named Mike, and he had a excuse me, he had a Model A Ford, and we used to drive around with it. So finally he said, do you want to buy my car? I said, yeah, how much? He says, you can get it for $50.
Wow.
So I said, I'll take it. I drove that car from Milford all the way to New Haven with no license and no insurance.
Oh boy.
I drove it right to when we were living on State Street in Rossford, with the yard there. And I drove around the yard to get acquainted with the car. But I was a good driver because when I was young, I was in this mechanical place called Jimmy's Ford Hospital, and I got quite a bit of experience about driving a car. So naturally, I went ahead and registered it and got the license and everything. So as I was driving the car, it had a rumble seat, and my sister-in-law and my brother-in-law who were on Oakley Street. They lived right upstairs from my mother-in-law and father-in-law's house, and that's where I was supposed to go. But my wife, being so kind-hearted, said, no, we'll go. And that's where we wound up on State Street with the 3 children. And I didn't like that. And that's why I bought the house in Highland Avenue from the contractor.
Okay.
His name was Giacomini. And it was one of the first houses that was built on Highland Avenue. So he gave me the blueprint, and I looked at it, I said, I don't want that. So I changed it so that I had a hallway rather than go through the living room to get into the house. And so from there on in, he built all his houses like that. So anyway, my experience, again, was that when I was on board ship and I didn't get hit with any bullets, that's when God knew me. And before I knew him. But now I know him because I'm born again Christian.
And how did that happen, Joe?
What?
When did you get born again?
What?
When did you you said God knew you before you knew him. So when did you become born again?
In 1984, I became born again. I was a Catholic up to that point. But here's a testimonial. I was in the bathroom taking a shower, and I got through taking a shower, wiped myself off, and all of a sudden, I heard something in the background. I looked around at who it was. It said, I had enough of you. I said, what's going on, you know? So all of a sudden, the Spirit came into me. I dropped right down on the floor, and tears were falling out of my eyes like water. And I heard his voice one more time. He said, help people, help people. That was it. And then I became born again.
That's a beautiful story. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, yeah. And I came to my wife with the Bible in my hand to talk to her. She said, no, I'm a Catholic and don't bother me. Because we were separated, but my children and myself, we made an issue because I was making pretty good money then as a salesman. As a matter of fact, I sold stainless steel cookware, wireless cookware, for 42 years in New Haven. And I was the best salesman in the country.
I'm not surprised.
And we got a private tour to the Football Hall of Fame in Canton, Ohio. You know? And I had a partner then, and I gave him the Super Bowl ring, which is worth a lot of money.
And tell me about this ring that you're wearing on this finger. I never have gotten a chance to ask, is that your Navy ring?
Yeah,
Beautiful.
I bought that when I was living in Bella Vista, and I seen it on a brochure, and I said, "That's it. That's what I want." It cost $194, and it says, I says, "Where were you? In the Navy or the Army, or where were you?" I says, "The Navy."
And is there anything special about the hat that you want everyone who's watching to know?
Well, that's a hat that I bought at the VA hospital, and it's a World War II hat. And everyone that looks at it says, "You're in World War II?" You know? And they don't take me to be my age, because today, or July the 26th, I turned 94.
Oh, you look great. And thank you so much for sharing your story with us today.
No, you're welcome. And that's my story.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for sharing it. Okay.
Your hands are
They're
a little
cold.
cold. Mine are warm.
Your hands are nice.